gotten so fancy since Jonathan. Do I have to turn this on, Jonathan?
Sorry, Allison, I was on a different page.
That's okay.
Here we go.
All right. Welcome. And welcome to you. We know you come here this morning for different reasons: to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. And with that, I noticed this slide. We're hopeful that the slide formatting works. We had a little bit of trouble transferring the slide deck to our system, and you'll find out why. Okay. So the chalice lighting. Callan, would you like to do the honors? It's our honorary chalice lighter. And with that, we can read these together. We covenant and affirm, to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Respect for the interdependent web of which we are a part. Okay, thank you. All right, now we take a moment to greet one another. I know there's some new faces here today and some old faces. So stand up, walk around, introduce yourself to your neighbors and friends. All right. Okay. There'll be more time to chat, and there's good treats after the service today. Next, for those of you who are not regular attendees, we take time in our gathering to share joys and concerns. So the way it works is you come up here to the microphone, you grab a rock, and you plunk it in the water, and you share something that you're happy about or something that you're concerned about. So who would like to go first? And children are definitely welcome. Come on up.
Mine's a joy. My daughter and my granddaughter joined me today.
Oh, nice. And a girl in a pink dress. You can grab the mic out.
My birthday's today.
Mine's a joy. I'm excited to be here for Evie's birthday.
Yeah. Okay, other joys or concerns?
Well, I have a couple joys. One is our grandsons, one of these beautiful afternoons, helped us dig potatoes, which is kind of a trip down memory lane for us. It was very fun when you have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old doing that. And then yesterday I went to our annual Horse Association meeting and saw friends I hadn't seen for a long time, and that was great. Beautiful horses, beautiful day. And we got an award for supporting this breed for so long, which is ironic because we made our living with them and they supported us. But however you go. Anyway, it was a good day.
Okay. Other joys and concerns? Okay. If not, then I put the giant rock in for all the joys and concerns that go unspoken. Try not to break it. Okay. All right. Well, this is a little primer. For those of you who are new to UU or have not been here before, and as a review, each gathering we remind ourselves of our values and our theme of compassion. So every month we have a different theme. The month of October, our theme is compassion. And you can see love is at the center, and our values are around there. Interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. Those are defined for you here. Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence and acknowledge our place in it. Pluralism. We are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all feel welcome and can thrive. Transformation. We adapt to a changing world. Generosity. We cultivate the spirit of gratitude and hope. And equity, we declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. So we try to have our different gatherings and have speakers that speak to these values around the theme of compassion this month. Next month, it'll be a different theme. And this month, we are very fortunate to have a local expert on Teddy Roosevelt, who I happen to be married to, share with us, and we will recognize how Teddy Roosevelt really spoke to and lived the values that we abide by, really acknowledging the interdependence of us with nature and society, appreciating pluralism, fighting for justice, looking and realizing that the world is ever-changing with a spirit of generosity and viewing everyone as equal. So we are very fortunate today, and I want to make sure that David has enough time. So we're moving rapidly, and I'll let David, what? Go back a slide. I'll start there. Okay. And then David will take over the mic, and I'm sure have time for questions, so come on up.
Good morning. After preparing for this the last few days, I want to share a couple personal things with you. When my kids were young, they had some rules for conversation and social interaction, and one was, don't get Dad started on landscaping, don't get him started on Denali, and don't get him started on the Kennedy assassination. Those were rules. There could have been a fourth one, and Maureen violated it. And that is, don't get David started on Teddy Roosevelt. And Maureen asked me if I could make a presentation on Teddy Roosevelt work, for this assembly. And I don't think I realized how appropriate it was until I was looking at that slide after my hours of preparation to get ready for this presentation. And that all fits. That's all part of Teddy's wilderness mantra. And you don't even have to interpret it very far. We hunted the interdependent web of all existence. Yeah, that's a pretty sound basis for environmentalism. We are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology, and Teddy would extend that to living things. Worked to be diverse, multicultural, beloved, where all feel welcome and can thrive, justice for the environment and for wild creatures and for wild spaces. Transformation, it was being transformed. And Teddy fought for a different kind of transformation of our natural world. Generosity, he was just a bubbling fountain of generosity his whole life. And he certainly believed in equity, and I'm going to refer to a couple things that got him in trouble with that approach to things. So hopefully that's the right button. And at a speech in Sacramento, California, after his big whirlwind tour of the West Coast in 1903, during his presidency, he made the point that we are not building this country for a day. It is to last through the ages. And when he said that, that's exactly what he meant. My interest in Teddy Roosevelt started with family trips to the Black Hills when I was 9 and 10 years old. And I wondered, what is that cowboy doing up there with those giants? And so I began my educational quest for the soul and the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt. To the point that in my high school class play of Arsenic and Old Lace, there was only one part I was auditioning for, and that was Teddy. And then that came around again in community theater, and again, that's all I want. That's the only part I wanted, and I ended up playing Teddy in the community theater role. And Allison ran into somebody at the grocery store who said, boy, they're really typecasting. Who else would they get to play Teddy except David? And she said, you got to remember, he's not playing Teddy Roosevelt. He's playing a crazy guy who thinks he's Teddy Roosevelt, and David is a crazy guy who thinks he's Teddy Roosevelt. So again, as my appreciation for Teddy grew and as I learned more and more about him and admired him more and more, that was a double click, the landscaping and Teddy Roosevelt thing overlapped in our yard. And in 2004, we had the world chainsaw champion Dennis Roger from Hinckley, Minnesota, carve Teddy Roosevelt out of a tree that we had lost in a storm. And it's been there for 21 years. Well, we've also have Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin at the end of the driveway. And when he was done with that, he came to me and said, do you have any pictures of Teddy? And I took him into my library. I started hauling books down. He's looking at all the books, he's looking at all the pictures, and he said, you're serious about this one, aren't you, David? And I said, oh yeah. So there's Teddy in front of the house, and we're proud to have him out there. Teddy was a voracious reader, and maybe even a perfect memory reader. He would read books in a day, and people would say he could recite them back to them verbatim the next day. And he always had books around. When he went to Africa, he had 60 different volumes, all the way from Tolstoy to Mark Twain, bound in pig leather. It became known as the Pigskin Library. because he didn't want if he happened to be reading on the carcass of a kill, he didn't want the blood to be able to soak into the volume. So he was covering against that. And so his adventurous streak and his commitment to the environment began with his reading. And it made him adventurous, and it made him somewhat fearless. The kids would tell me that does bear a resemblance to me reading. So, Teddy was born in 1858 on 27th of October. His dad was Theodore Roosevelt Sr., who was known as Greatheart. He was a great philanthropist in New York City. The family fortune had been made at least 2 generations before that in glass importing. And Teddy said that his father was the greatest man he had ever known and the only man of whom he was ever truly afraid, which is interesting. I mean, he loved his father with his whole heart, but there was that edge there. His mother was Martha Bullock. She was from Georgia. Theodore Sr. had met her on a trip, a business trip to the South, and this created some problems for the family very rapidly. So she grew up in Georgia. That's a picture of her family home. It was the South of slavery. People think that the Bullock Mansion might have been the inspiration for the set for, oh God, I can't remember the name of the movie. Gone with the Wind, yeah. And her brothers all served in the Confederacy. Second row down, far left, that's Uncle Jimmy, James Roosevelt, when he was an officer on the CSS Alabama, a commerce raider that he had arranged the construction of in England when England was trying to decide what side of the war they were going to come in on, to the extent that when the Civil War ended and everybody, right up to include Jefferson Davis, got offered the chance to sign a pardon, which Jefferson Davis declined. He might have been the only one. Uncle Jimmy was not offered a pardon. He spent the rest of his life living in England. And he was visited frequently by the relatives, but that was quite a schism, and Theodore Sr. did not serve. He paid for a substitute, which was common in the Civil War for rich people. Now, he was involved. He arranged a system that made it easier for soldiers at the front to get part of their paycheck home to their families, so that was a significant benefit to those people that were affected by the organization that he created. That is a very early picture of Teddy, and he wasn't Teddy in the family, he was TD. That's the way it was pronounced. And people that knew him, you know, I turn my phone off every time when I get here, and today I didn't. I don't care. Anyway, he was TD, and throughout his life, if anybody called him Teddy, everybody around knew that whoever was calling him Teddy didn't know him very well, because he was Theodore or Thee, or to the close family members, he was TD. The picture on the right, the open window with the 2 little boys in it, that's Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession in New York City. And those 2 little boys are Theodore Roosevelt and his younger brother Elliot. The house is their grandfather Cornelius Van Schack Roosevelt's home, and the parade happened to go right by, and the 2 little boys were hanging out the window, and Lincoln was always Teddy's hero and yardstick. By the time he was 7 years old, when he discovered a seal on a wharf down at a market in New York, and he started measuring it and documenting the size and the teeth and everything else. He was an accomplished naturalist by the time he was 8, 9 years old. The genus species name designation for living beings, the Linnaean system had just come into effect. He had little labels made up, and he would collect birds and frogs, and he learned taxidermy, and he would mount them. He had a lot of live ones in the house, kind of as a distraction to the housekeeping staff. One time he had picked up one too many frogs, and he stuck it under his hat. And on the way home, he ran into some friends of his dad's and tipped the cap, and the frog jumped out, and that became part of the lore. But he had severe asthma growing up. He wasn't real active as a young child. People didn't think he was going to live past his 4th birthday. David McCullough discovered that a lot of Theodore's asthma attacks were right before church on Sunday morning. And there was another significant blip in his asthma attacks, like on days that Elliot was going to have a birthday party. Stuff like that. And I would like to point out that Evie's birthday is not today, but the party is. So that is obviously more important, but her birthday's tomorrow. So little boy on the left is 11 years old. By this time, he'd already been to Europe and back and collected specimens in Europe and criticized the European taxidermy. The picture on the right is another trip to, no, it's the same trip, Europe. That's the Dresden Reading Club. That's Theodore, Elliot, and his cousins, and they were immersed in German. By the time he was an adult, he spoke French, he spoke Portuguese, he spoke excellent German. He read the Song of Roland in the original antiquated French, and if you asked him, would recite the whole thing back to you. So anyway, if you asked him to do it again, he might do it twice. That's a quote from David McCullough. Anyway, he was extremely gifted. He could read a book a day. These drawings, he established the Roosevelt National History Museum, which was in his bedroom and in the icebox. He had little tags made up, and everything in it was identified by genus and species, in Latin, right? And he drew those drawings, and his taxidermy was excellent. There's a white snowy owl still in the Smithsonian that Teddy stuffed as a little boy. So he's just a multi-talented individual. Let me get my date straight here, in 1876, he went to Harvard. The gentleman on the left is a guy named Cutler, who was his 2-year prep tutor to get to Harvard. Theodore never went to public schools. He was homeschooled, and then he had this tutor who became very successful running the prep school. Cutler lived till 1918, and he ran this prep school for like 40 years. In February of Teddy's sophomore year at Harvard, his father died suddenly and horribly from stomach cancer. And his best friend at Harvard dropped out of school. And by now, Teddy had met some guides. He'd been to upstate New York. He'd been to Maine a couple times. And he also managed to fall in love that same year to Alice Lee. And she wasn't being real receptive right away, so between his father's death and his best friend leaving school, he did a typical Teddy. And he went to Maine with these two guys on the right, Wilmot Dow on the left and William Seward on the right, and he was friends with them the whole rest of his life. They were Maine woodsmen, and he spent 1,000 miles and 69 days with Sewell over a period of 2 years. The Sewell house is still there in Island Falls, Maine. It's now a yoga studio and a B&B. And that was his first real deep wilderness experience with a guide. He graduated in 1880. He was already working on a volume that I brought back there you can pick up and look at, that 22-year-old Theodore Roosevelt was writing, The Naval War of 1812. So he was kind of a nerd, too. That book, when it came out in 1882, was required on every American warship. Well, the War of 1812 was all sails. By the time the 1880s came around, it was steam and it was iron and it was a whole different world, and yet that book was required on every American warship. So anyway, he convinced Alice to marry him by the fall of 1880. He proposed on his birthday in 1880, on October 27th. And they were married and moved back to New York City. And he went to Columbia Law School for a while and didn't like it and decided to go into politics, which was unheard of for people of means in those days. It was saloon keepers and undertakers, and that's where the muscle was. And Teddy's comment was, well, that means that my friends don't belong to the governing class, and I intend to be a member of the governing class. And at that time, he was 23 years old, and he ran for the state assembly, and he won. And they called him Jim Dandy and all sorts of other things, and he ended up dropping some smart aleck political opponent in the well of the Albany State House when he felt like he had taken enough. He sponsored a lot of legislation. Within 2 years, he was the majority leader at the age of 26. He met Jacob Riis. Here he is in the assembly. Jacob Riis was a journalist and had taken pictures of the slum conditions, and Teddy at first was not motivated about concern that were being brought to the state assembly about the conditions of cigar makers in New York City. That was done in their own homes, there were bales of tobacco around, it was just filthy, and Teddy went on a tour with Jacob Riis and threw his weight behind it, and this bill passed that made it mandatory that there would be places of employment so that the occupation would occur someplace else, and a year later it was declared unconstitutional. The Republicans were in the majority, they were very conservative. The government's business was not business, and they had no respect for that intrusion as they saw it that went beyond the government's role. It did pass a couple years later after Teddy was no longer in the assembly. Well, anyway, things are going well. It's fall of 1883. Teddy takes his first big game hunting trip to North Dakota, and he's just enchanted by the Badlands. And he's so entranced that he gets a couple local cowboys. He became friends with a lot of them. He took a lot of abuse from the cowboys. Didn't do him any good one time on a roundup when he yelled at the guys and said, "Hasten forward swiftly there." But they came to understand him and like him. He had to drop a couple guys in bar fights where he didn't, countenance any insults. So anyway, Alice is pregnant. He's in Albany. And he gets a telegram on February 12th, 1884. His mother is dying, and so is Alice. He gets on the train, he hustles back to New York, he barely gets there, they both die on the same day on February 14th. Baby Alice, he names the baby Alice. Baby Alice lived to be 90, lived to be Ronald Reagan's chief of White House protocol. He was active in Republican parties the whole time. And when everybody was paying more attention to him than they were to her when she got married in the White House, she said, yes, Father would like to be the corpse at every funeral and the bride at every wedding, which was a very good observation on Alice's part. Well, anyway, she died of Bright's disease, a kidney failure. His mom died of typhoid. He never spoke of Alice again. Never. Never mentioned Alice to the baby Alice. Baby Alice was shunted off to his older sister, Bammy's, and she took care of Alice for 4 years. There's Teddy's diary entry from February 14th. And that's exactly the way he felt. And when he felt like that, he would go to the wilderness. The wilderness was his cathedral. It was where he could seek solace and comfort and rejuvenation. And he went back to the Badlands. And he called Wilmot Dow and William Seward, are probably sorry they ever met him. He called these two Maine up north woodsmen and said, "Hey, you want to come out and run my ranch in North Dakota?" Well, they didn't know anything about ranching, but they were both tougher than nails. They went out and they ran the ranch when he wasn't there. He paid them both $14,000, which was today's money would be 13 times that much, so $170,000 or something like that. And he started this ranch. One of the famous stories was he got back, and when he went back this time, he went whole hog, Western suits and stuff. He paid $1,000. This picture was taken in a studio in New York. He paid $1,000 for that jacket. I'm sorry, $100. So it'd be $1,300 in today's money. He had his spurs done by Tiffany's, his belt buckles done by Tiffany. The ivory grips on his .45 Colt revolvers were done by Tiffany's. And he really started out really very much in costume. And that didn't last. Well, he's still got the fancy shirt on. But one time at about, what would have been? He got out in 1887. It would have been like 1884. They got back to the ranch, and the Little Missouri River's right there, and they had a boat that they used to get back and forth with supplies because it was easier to load up a boat. And the rope had been cut, and the boat was gone. So he and Dow and Sewell make a new boat. That takes 3 days. So now the bad guys have a 3-day head start on them. and they're going to get him. And they went down the river after him, and they caught up with him 3 days later. You can see Teddy guarding him. And they had to decide what to do with him. Well, it was 30 miles to Dickinson. And that was where the next sheriff was, and that was not down the river. So Dow and Sewell took the boat on down the river, and Teddy marched these guys at gunpoint. And I mean, it was a hostile environment. They weren't fighting to get away, but he marched them to the sheriff in Dickinson and turned them both in. And the one guy said, "Man, if you ever get to," I can't remember where the state prison was, "you come and visit me. I want to get to know you." And I'm thinking that his political opponents during his presidency might have taken note of this story about chasing the bad guys down the river, because Teddy didn't quit, Theodore didn't quit easy, and it was just part of him. So anyway, he would be back and forth to New York City from Medora, and his younger sister Corinne had been real good friends with Edith Carroll, who had quite a crush on Teddy starting at age 4. And Teddy obviously felt some jeopardy, and he told Corinne that when he came home, Edith was not to be around. And one time he came home, and Edith was at the top of the stairs, because sisters don't always do what their brothers ask them to do. They were married 2 years later. They had 5 children of their own. There's Edith on the left, and there's the whole brood before the White House. This is probably when he's governor. It's Quentin on the left, Theodore, Ted Jr. behind him, Archie, Alice, Kermit, Edith, and Ethel. That's the whole crew. Theodore ran for mayor of New York in 1886, right after he married Edith, and came in third in a 3-man race. And he started writing. He wrote 36 books in his life, and that kind of what kept the family finances afloat, because he'd gotten out of the ranch and lost like $80,000 out there, which would be a lot of money today, any place. But that was a big chunk out of his inheritance. It's interesting that Winston Churchill was the most published, widely read leader in England, and they met, and Theodore was in America, and they met once. Churchill was part of a trade delegation when he was governor, so it would have been 1888 to 1889 when Teddy was governor. And Churchill slouched in his chair, smoked a cigar all through dinner, and did not rise when ladies entered the room. That got him off Theodore's list right now. He thought Churchill was a total cad. So after the unsuccessful try for mayor, he was appointed to the Civil Service Commission, which he re-energized and made much more of a merit system than it had ever been. After that, he became police commissioner of New York City and got attention from the press as far away as in London. He used to go out at night and stalk around, keeping after his police officers. And in 1897, a year into his presidency, William McKinley appointed Theodore as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. When the Spanish-American War loomed on the horizon, Theodore was not going to be denied. His father had not served in his nation's hour of need, and Theodore was not going to not go. He left 6 kids at home. Edith had just gotten over some exploratory surgery for abdominal abscesses, and he was going. And he raised a volunteer regiment. He was placed as second in command under a Medal of Honor winner, Leonard Wood. They didn't fight, but they elbowed their way on to the first transport that got out of Tampa. I don't know how many movie cameras there were in America in 1898, but there was a movie camera there when the first volunteer cavalry got on the boat. And it went with them to Cuba. There wasn't enough room for the officers to take their horses, but there was a cameraman there with a movie camera. And we know who got him there. So Theodore was making sure that he could maintain his profile, and on July 1st, 1898, he led the first volunteer cavalry up Kettle Hill and up San Juan Hill, and came home as maybe the most recognizable man and the most popular man in America. The Rough Riders came from the West, they came from the East, they had the best polo player in the world, they had cowboys and Native Americans, and they were on fire for Theodore Roosevelt. His time in the West was what enabled him to become president. He would not have been president if he had not spent those 5 years in the West. So in the time before Theodore became president, there was some conservation activity. And there was some in America, there was, less around the world. These two guys, Thomas Platt on the left and Mark Hanna on the right, were the two bigwig Republican organizers of the conservatives in the Republican Party, which was the majority. Neither one of them wanted Teddy Roosevelt anywhere near the White House. They didn't want him in Washington. They didn't want him as governor in New York. So when Teddy got back, the first thing he did was become governor of New York, and he won quite easily. I'm getting a little bit out of sequence here. There's the whole group in Washington. Teddy and Edith built this wonderful home at the Oyster Bay, New York, on Sagamore Hill. Some of the people that were Theodore's predecessors in environmentalism, the guy on the left is Edmund Burke, who was a British politician, a big supporter of the American Revolution, big critic of the French Revolution. He lived from 1729 to 1797, and he is the father of modern conservatism, period. End of discussion. And his comment on environmental stewardship was, if individuals are unmindful of what they have received from their ancestors or of what is due to their posterity, no one generation could link with another. Men would become little more than flies of the summer. That's from Edmund Burke. The guy in the middle, George Perkins Marsh, was the giant of American environmentalism in the middle of the 19th century. He wrote a book called Man and Nature that influenced every other American environmentalist in the second half of the 19th century. The book came out in 1864. And this is haunting. Quote from Man and Nature: "The earth is fast becoming an unfit home for its noblest inhabitant." 1864. "And another era of equal human crime and human improvidence, and of the like duration with that through which traces of that crime and improvidence extend, would reduce it," the earth, "to such a condition of impoverished productiveness, of shattered surface, of climatic excess, as to threaten the deprivation and barbarism, and perhaps even create the extinction of that species." In 1864. And then the guy on the right is Henry David Thoreau, and you're probably familiar with this, some of you. This is wonderful. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to confront only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." The guy on the left is John Burroughs, who was a giant in environmentalism in the second half of the 19th century. Most of these guys were ornithologists. Birds just fascinated these guys. Guy in the middle is John Muir, and there was a distinction between the environmentalists at that time. There were people who were conservationists, which meant wise use, and John Muir was a preservationist, which means you don't touch it. The guy on the right is a guy named Elliott Coues, and he was a mammologist, and that's Coues on the right, and also ornithologist. William Dutcher was a big guy. He was an ornithologist. George Bird Grinnell in the middle. That's really his middle name. He has kind of an interesting distinction. In 1874, he was a naturalist on the George Custer expedition to the Black Hills that looked for gold. And in 1876, he declined the invitation to be the naturalist on Custer's expedition into the Montana prairie, which ended at greasy grass. the Little Bighorn, after Grinnell was invited to be on that. And Clinton Hart Merriam was, Miriam on the right, he was incredible. He was an entomologist, an ornithologist, a mammologist, a physician. He was very influential. These guys were they all had Teddy's ear. Again, Henry Fairfield Osborne, Frank Chapman, all these guys were basically ornithologists. Gifford Pinchot on the right, he was Theodore's right-hand man. He went to Harvard. No, I'm sorry, he went to Yale. There were no academic forestry programs in the United States at that time. He went to France and studied. He came back. His family endowed Yale with $150,000 to start a forestry program, which today would be $1,900,000. So the Pinchot family had money, and Pinchot lived till 1946 and was involved. He became governor of Pennsylvania, and he was involved in environmental action during every phase of his life. So we got Teddy up to the presidency. We got these giants around him, many of whom become cabinet members, and it's time to talk about what happened during his presidency. It was kind of a whirlwind, and there were obstacles everywhere. And it makes more sense when you understand what some of the obstacles were. From 1901 to 1909, he became president on September 14th, 1901. He left office on March 3rd, 1909. He created 150 national forests, mostly because he could. It was an executive prerogative. He created 51 federal bird reserves, which had never existed. And the first one was Pelican Island in Florida, and he asked his Attorney General and the Secretary of the Interior if there was any law that would prevent him from declaring Pelican Island a federal bird preserve, and they said, well, no. And he said, so I so declare. And he did that 51 more times. He created 4 national game preserves, 6 national parks. There's a list back there if you want to look at it. And 18 national monuments, which is really the interesting part. Theodore by now had this incredible political experience between the governorship, where he did modifications to the Game and Fish Commission and supported the National Lacey Act, which prevented exchange of animal parts across state lines that were wildlife. 18 national monuments. That was a presidential prerogative. So the Grand Canyon was there. Arizona wasn't a state till 1912. It was a territory. And Theodore Roosevelt kind of buttoned up that national canyon. It was starting to be developed on the rims of the canyon. Railroads and hotels just thought, man, this is going to draw people from everywhere. And he could pull a national monument out of his hat. He couldn't make it a national park because that required congressional approval. So he had learned all this. He was the right man in the right place at the right time. So he declared the rim of the National Canyon a national monument, and then he took care of the rest of it by declaring the bottom of the canyon, the walls and the base of the canyon, as a federal wildlife preserve, which he had the authority to do. And it became a national park in 1919, after his death. So he knew the obstacles and he knew how to get around them. In all, 234 million acres of protected land. Protected from indiscriminate logging, mining, drilling, hunting. These areas that became the bird preserves were being just ravaged for feathers for women's hats, which just outraged Theodore and Pinchot and Chapman. So he had all sorts of allies, but he had to know the trail. So that 234 million acres comes out to 85,800 acres a day locked up and protected. He didn't ignore other things. During his presidency, 1906 was the Federal Pure Food and Drug Act. The Antiquities Act that let him do the national monuments. He established that act in 1906. And somehow Congress let that get through, not realizing what was coming at them. They should have remembered those boat thieves in North Dakota, you know. They should have known that there was something coming. He placed 44 antitrust suits, this is what he's famous for, against corporations that he viewed as being against the public good. The 3 previous presidents combined had served 18 antitrust suits. There was a national coal strike in 1902, very early in his presidency. And he mobilized the army to take over the mines. He didn't mobilize the army against the miners. He took over the mines. And people went back to work because that's what heated American homes in 1902. And winter was coming. And in 1906, as part of the Pure Food and Drug Act, after Upton Sinclair published, The Jungle, Theodore passed the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. So he was busy. People called him the whirlwind president, the cyclone president. They didn't call him Jim Dandy anymore. So he got a lot done. In a reflection of his wilderness retreat status after he left the presidency, he had made a mistake with his election in 1904. He had declared that he would not run again. He would honor George Washington's tradition of 2 terms. Edith cringed when he said it. And he got very tempted as it came to the 11th hour, but he stuck by his guns. Speaking of the 11th hour, 37 national forests were established between February 27th, 1909 and March 3rd, 1909. 24 on the last day. So he wasn't waiting around or crossing his fingers. Oh, but when he left the presidency, he was second-guessing himself, and so he disappeared into the wilderness again. He went to Africa for a 12-month safari, and then on a grand tour of Europe where he was just feted everywhere. He gave the Man in the Arena speech at the Sorbonne in Paris. He represented the United States at the funeral of Edward VI, I think, who was president. And he came back, and his successor, William Howard Taft, his best friend, who he was losing confidence in, had fired Gifford Pinchot as the forestry director and fired James Garfield, the assassinated president's son, who was a rabid environmentalist. He was Secretary of the Interior, and Teddy was on fire, and he was going to run for president again. And that's when the Republicans held their convention after Teddy had won every primary they had, and kind of sidestepped the primaries and got Taft nominated on the 4th ballot for a second term. Teddy's supporters stormed out of the arena chanting, "Thou shalt not steal." And 3 weeks later, they had their convention, the Bull Moose, the Progressive Party convention, in the same hall in Chicago. Teddy ran second in the presidential race in 1912 and destroyed the Republican Party for at least 4 national elections by splitting them, because the progressive Republicans favored Roosevelt, the conservative Republicans favored Taft. So Teddy was despondent again after his African thing. During the 1912 election, there was an assassination attempt on Theodore in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. October 14th, 1912. He was shot in the chest at a range of about 30 feet. Fortunately, his speech was 50 pages long and was folded over twice and in his jacket pocket, and his glasses case, which was steel, was on top of that. And the glasses case and the blood-stained speech are in the Theodore Roosevelt home site museum in New York City. He went to the hall, he gave the speech, he spoke for 90 minutes. But after that, he went on his River of Doubt expedition, which almost killed him. They were on that unknown river for 4 months, And he wanted them to leave him alive, and Kermit wouldn't hear of it. His son Kermit was always with him on these things. Okay, and Teddy realized he'd be more of a burden on him dead than on alive, so he struggled along with him. So he got through that and kind of went into frenzy over World War I preparedness, and didn't make any progress on being allowed to raise a volunteer division to go to France, because they had professionals to do that. And as his life was winding down, he had a couple of aphorisms which he had used many, many times, and these are two of my favorites. Every victory merely lays the ground free for another battle, which was certainly a trademark of his presidency. He didn't leave things sitting undone. The other one is a reflection of his dependence on wilderness for rejuvenation during Depression. And he wrote in his autobiography, "Black care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough," which is a reference to his tendency to depression during the end. Who would imagine that with Teddy Roosevelt? He became, in 1910, he became the first president. After his presidency, but he went up in an airplane. The pilot had to tell him to settle down because he was waving so hard to the crowd that he almost tipped the plane over. He was the first, during his presidency, he went to visit the building of the Panama Canal, probably the greatest accomplishment of his presidency, which wasn't completed till years later. And he was a great wordsmith and author. And I'm going to finish this with a quote from African Game Trails, his book about the trip to Africa. And it kind of goes with the black care perspective that Teddy had. "There are no words that can tell the hidden spirit of the wilderness, that can reveal its mystery, its melancholy, and its charm." So he was a many-sided, very talented man. Oh, he also went down in a submarine and piloted the submarine for a while after he was out of it. So he was the first president to go down in a submarine. And this might be the most famous picture ever taken. That is Theodore and John Muir in Yosemite. So he was, probably to this day, the giant of environmentalism in America, with mind and muscle.
Go ahead. Get back up there.
Yeah.
That was one of the really fine, interesting thing. I didn't know about him
Well,
that much,
thank you.
and now I know much more.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate it.
Yeah, I did.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I mean, Teddy's kind of become a cartoon character almost, and there's just so many sides to him. I mean, he wrote 36 books. The Naval War of 1812 when he was 22. No wonder he couldn't get a date.
My company is actually building the Theodore Roosevelt Library in New York, the Living Building Challenge.
Oh,
Cool.
good,
Yeah.
good.
Nice.
Gretchen's wearing a baseball cap from the Bully Pulpit Golf Course in Medora.
No, this is from the.
Oh, that's from the museum. Okay, I thought that was a golf hat.
Library's baseball team, the Rough Riders, where Teddy is there.
All right.
Do you have the floor?
Tell us about how he more or less saved football.
Oh yeah. Oh, there was a time when there were all sorts of fatalities in American collegiate football, and he was virtually on a committee that established the NCAA and made the rules more stringent about safety in football. Yeah, which we're dealing with to this day. Yeah. Yeah, he was virtually a founder of the NCAA with, a number of other men. Yeah.
I'll bet there were people then that thought.
What?
I'll bet there were people then that thought, no, it's not gonna, that said, it's not gonna be as much fun to watch now that they're wearing
These leather
Leather.
stockings over their heads.
That did little good. Other questions? Other questions? Okay. All right. Yes? What?
wants to know how you like dogs
Teddy loved dogs.
All right.
Tolerated cats. He never fed a cat with a dog.
Okay, thanks, David. That was great. Upcoming announcements. On October 19th, our own Maureen Ash will be leading a conversation on cultivating compassion in our communities. And on October 26th, Janet Ellinger and Jean Gaffal will be here giving a talk called Considering Grief. November, our theme is Nurturing Gratitude, so the upcoming gatherings will focus on that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support and your presence. If you want to make a gift to the organization, there's a basket outside to the left on a chair. And then please join us for coffee in the kitchen. One of the things that Teddy Roosevelt loved was food and cookies and sweets, particularly liked peaches. So there's a peach cobbler there with cream to pour over the top of it if you'd like it. And there's also some sugar cookies there. The recipe for the sugar cookies was the go-to recipe for Edith Roosevelt. It was taped inside, not taped, but it was inside the one of her cookbooks. And these are the cookies, the sugar cookies, that they served with tea and coffee when people came to Sagamore Hill as guests. So join us for coffee in the kitchen and or tea. There is hot water there for tea. Okay, then at the end of our gatherings, we always come together in a large circle and hold hands, and we repeat our parting words, which are on the overhead and up on the walls to the side.
You know, I was going pretty fast, but I should tell you that when Theodore married Alice in 1886, they were married in a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Question all things. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak.